They came for the wrong daughter, sitting in the front row. My birth mother was not crying tears of joy. She was calculating my net worth. They thought they were walking into a reunion and walking out with a check, but when the dean lifted the microphone, my mother froze. The program did not list their last name anymore, and what I was about to say would ensure they never hid behind their excuses again. My name is Nora Chavez, and for the last 15 years, I have waited for this exact moment to suffocate the people who gave birth to me. I stood in the wings of the stage, the heavy velvet curtain obscuring me from the sea of faces in the auditorium, but I could see them perfectly. The air conditioning backstage was blasting, sending a chill through the thin fabric of my graduation gown. Yet my hands were not cold from the temperature. They were ice cold from a rage that had been marinating for over a decade. It was a focused, sharp physical sensation, like holding a block of dry ice until it burns, out there, beyond the blinding stage lights. The Crestview University commencement ceremony was in full swing. The roar of applause for the previous speaker was deafening, vibrating through the floorboards beneath my heels. It was a day of triumph for everyone else. Families were weeping with joy, fathers were clapping until their palms stung, and graduates were throwing their caps in anticipation of a bright, lucrative future. But for me, this was not a celebration. It was an ambush. I adjusted the gold sash draped over my shoulders. Valedictorian, summa cum laude, editor-in-chief of the Law Review. These were just words etched onto heavy cardstock to most people. To me, they were weapons. I leaned closer to the gap in the curtain, narrowing my eyes to focus on the VIP section in the front row. The university had reserved these seats for the families of the top honor students. It was prime real estate, meant for the people who had sacrificed sleep and savings to get their children to this podium. And there they were, the imposters. My birth mother sat with a posture that could only be described as aggressively regal. She had dyed her hair a rich, chestnut brown since I last saw her, likely to hide the gray that comes with age, though certainly not from the stress of raising a sick child. She wore a cream-colored suit that I knew cost more than my first car. She was sitting straight, her chin tilted up, but her eyes were not watching the stage. They were darting left and right, scanning the other families in the VIP section. She was calculating. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she assessed the net worth of the people around her, wondering who was worth networking with at the reception. She looked like a shark in silk. Next to her sat my birth father. He was less subtle. He had his phone out, shielding the screen from the glare of the overhead lights. He was not taking photos. He was not texting a congratulations message. His thumb was tapping rhythmically, impatiently against the screen. I knew that look. It was the look of a man refreshing his banking app or checking the status of a pending transaction. He looked bored, annoyed even, as if the ceremony were a mandatory meeting he had to endure before his bonus check cleared. They looked spectacular. They looked like the perfect, supportive, upper-middle-class American parents. They looked like liars. I shifted my gaze 2 seats to the left. The air caught in my throat. There was the woman who actually deserved to be here, Gabby, my real mother in every way that mattered. Even if biology disagreed, she was wearing her Sunday best, a floral dress she had bought specifically for today, and she was clutching a bouquet of supermarket flowers so tightly that the stems were bending. Her eyes were already red. She was not looking around to see who was watching her. She was not checking her phone. She was staring at the empty podium with a fierce, unwavering pride that made my chest ache. She looked small next to the imposing figures of my birth parents, but she was the only giant in that row. The irony was suffocating. My birth parents did not know who Gabby was. To them, she was just another audience member. They had no idea that the woman sitting inches away from them was the one who had stayed awake through the fever dreams, the one who had worked triple shifts to pay for the textbooks that got me here. They did not know she was the reason I was alive. They had come back for one reason only: the rumors. News travels fast in elite circles. They had heard that the valedictorian of Crestview Law had already been scouted by 3 major firms in New York and D.C. They had heard the whispers about signing bonuses. They had heard that the daughter they discarded like medical waste 15 years ago was about to become a very wealthy woman. They were not here for a reunion. They were here for a return on an investment they had canceled years ago. The master of ceremonies, a tall man with a booming voice, stepped up to the microphone. The room quieted down, a hush of anticipation sweeping over the crowd. "And now," the MC announced, his voice echoing off the high ceiling, "it is my distinct honor to introduce the valedictorian of the class of 2026. I took a deep breath. This was it. "This student has demonstrated unparalleled academic excellence," the MC continued, reading from the script I had reviewed yesterday. "Recipient of the Dean's Award for Distinguished Service, a fierce advocate for patient rights, and a future force in the world of medical litigation." The giant jumbotron screens on either side of the stage flickered. The camera crew, following their cue, panned the camera directly to the VIP section. I watched the screen from my vantage point. The camera zoomed in on my birth parents. This was their moment. They had been waiting for this public validation. My birth mother shifted, angling her body toward the lens, putting on a practiced, dazzling smile of maternal adoration. My birth father finally put his phone away, buttoning his jacket to look presentable. They leaned in slightly toward each other, presenting the image of a united, proud front. They were ready to wave. They were ready to accept the applause of thousands of people for a job they did not do. They expected to hear the name they had given me. They expected to hear Whitfield. The dean leaned into the microphone. He adjusted his glasses. Looking down at the card in his hand, he paused for dramatic effect. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome." My birth mother's smile was at its peak. She was practically glowing with the anticipation of reflected glory. "Our valedictorian, Nora Chavez." The name rang out like a gunshot on the massive screen. The reaction was high definition and instant. It was better than I had imagined. My birth mother did not just stop smiling. Her face collapsed. It was as if the muscles controlling her expression had been severed. She froze, her mouth slightly open, her eyes widening in a mixture of confusion and horror. The clapping started around her, a thunderous wave of applause, but she sat there like a statue. The name Chavez had hit her like a physical blow. It was a slap in the face. It was the name of the Hispanic nurse they had left me with. It was the name of the help. It was a rejection of their lineage. Broadcast live to the entire auditorium. My birth father looked stunned, his head snapping toward his wife as if to ask if he had heard correctly. The arrogant boredom was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp panic. They were not being celebrated. They were being erased. The camera lingered on them for a second too long, capturing their shock for everyone to see. Before cutting away to the empty stage, that was my cue. I stepped out from behind the curtain. The stage lights hit me, blinding and hot. The applause swelled, a wall of sound that vibrated in my bones. I walked to the center of the stage, my head held high. I did not look at the dean. I did not look at the professors. I walked straight to the podium and gripped the sides of it with my cold hands. I looked down. From this height, the faces in the front row were clear. I found Gabby immediately. She was crying openly now, beaming, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. She mouthed something that looked like "I love you." Then, I shifted my gaze. I locked eyes with the woman with the chestnut hair and the man in the expensive suit. They were staring up at me, their faces pale. My birth mother looked like she was trying to solve a complex math problem in her head. She was looking at my face, searching for the 13-year-old girl she had abandoned in a hospital room, trying to reconcile that frightened child with the woman standing above her. She looked terrified, not because she missed me, but because she realized she had lost control of the narrative. She realized that the Whitfield brand she protected so fiercely had just been denied. I leaned toward the microphone. The silence that fell over the room was heavy with expectation. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, sharp and electric. I remembered the day they left. I remembered the sound of their shoes clicking on the hospital linoleum as they walked away without looking back. I remembered the feeling of being a line item on a budget sheet that they decided to cut. They thought that day was the end of our story. They thought they could edit me out of their lives and then write themselves back in when the stock value went up. They were wrong. I looked directly at them. Ignoring the thousands of other people in the room, I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. It was not a smile of forgiveness. It was a smile of warning. You thought you were coming here to collect a check, I thought, my internal voice screaming over the silence. You thought you could smile for the cameras and take credit for my survival. But you forgot one thing. I am not your daughter anymore. I am the daughter of the woman who stayed. I took a breath, preparing to deliver the speech that would burn their reputation to the ground. Before the story ends, they will know one absolute truth: abandoning me on that rainy Tuesday 15 years ago was not just cruel, it was the most expensive mistake they ever made. "Good morning, class of 2026, I said, my voice steady, amplified, and reaching every corner of the room. And good morning to the parents who actually showed up. I saw my birth father flinch. The countdown had ended. The execution was about to begin. To understand why I stood on that stage with a heart full of ice, you have to go back to the moment the ice first entered my bloodstream. It was not at a graduation ceremony. It was 15 years ago, inside the sterile beige walls of Rockbridge Regional Medical Center. The memory does not start with a sound or an image. It starts with a smell. It is the sharp, chemical sting of industrial-strength antiseptic mixed with the dusty, dry scent of recycled air and cheap paper, even now, over a decade later. If I walk past a clinic and catch a drift of isopropyl alcohol, my stomach tightens. I am instantly 13 years old again, sitting on the edge of an examination table that was too high for my legs, shivering in a gown that felt less like fabric and more like an oversized napkin. I remember the sound of the paper crinkling every time I shifted my weight. I was trying to find a comfortable position, but my lower back was throbbing with a dull, persistent ache that had been keeping me awake for 3 nights. My parents, the polished and perfect Whitfields, sat on the 2 plastic chairs in the corner. They looked wildly out of place. My mother was wearing a silk blouse that cost more than the nurse's monthly salary, and she kept checking her watch, tapping her manicured fingernails against the strap. My father was scrolling through emails on his BlackBerry, sighing loudly every time the signal dropped. They were not worried. They were inconvenienced. The door opened, and Dr. Nolan Keats walked in. I remember him vividly because he was the first adult in my life who looked at me like I was a person, not a prop. He was young, maybe in his late 30s, with tired eyes and a stethoscope draped around his neck like a heavy chain. He did not smile. He held a clipboard in his hand, and the way he gripped it tight. Knuckles White told me the news was not good before he even opened his mouth. He pulled a stool over to me, sitting down so we were at eye level. He ignored my parents for a moment and looked right at me. "Nora, I am going to be straight with you," he said, his voice low and steady. "We have your test results back. Your kidneys are in trouble." He explained it in words I could only half understand at 13. Autoimmune disease, aggressive attack, acute renal failure. My body was essentially turning on itself, attacking my filters as if they were foreign invaders. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Then he turned to my parents. "Mrs. Whitfield, Mr. Whitfield, this is a serious condition." "Doctor," Keats said, swiveling on his stool to face them, "Nora is going to need immediate, aggressive treatment. We are looking at dialysis starting as soon as tomorrow, and she will likely need a transplant down the line. It is a long road, but the prognosis is manageable if we follow the protocol strictly. She can live a full life." The room went silent. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to get louder. I waited for my mother to rush over and hug me. I waited for my father to ask, "Is she in pain, or is she going to be okay instead?" My father cleared his throat. He put his phone away, but he did not look at me. He looked at the doctor. "What are we talking about here?" he asked. "Doctor," Keats blinked, confused. "I'm sorry. The numbers," my father said, his voice flat and businesslike. "What is the financial exposure?" Our insurance plan has a lifetime cap for catastrophic care. I need to know if this is going to exceed it. Doctor. Keats looked at my father as if he were speaking a foreign language. Then, he composed himself. Dialysis is expensive. Mr. Whitfield, we are talking about tens of thousands of dollars a month, potentially. The transplant surgery, the anti-rejection drugs, the hospital stays. It could run into the hundreds of thousands over the next few years. My mother made a small, strangled noise. She looked at my father, her eyes wide with a specific kind of panic. It was not the panic of a mother losing a child. It was the panic of a socialite losing her standing. We cannot do that, she whispered. But in the small room, it sounded like a shout. Richard, we cannot do that. The portfolio is already leveraged for the remodel. And we have the trust for Kendall. Kendall, my older sister, the golden child, the one who is currently at an elite boarding school in Connecticut, preparing for an Ivy League future. My father nodded slowly, doing mental math. He looked at me, then back at the doctor. We have a liquidity issue, he said, as if discussing a bad stock trade. We have set aside a specific amount for our children's education and future. Kendall is entering her prep year. If we divert those funds to this, we compromise her acceptance chances. We compromise everything we have built. Doctor, Keats looked horrified. He stood up, his face flushing slightly. Mr. Whitfield, we are talking about your daughter's life. Not a tuition payment. There are other options. My mother interjected quickly, smoothing her skirt. Surely there are programs grants charity care, doctor. Keats took a deep breath, trying to remain professional. There are programs, he said stiffly. The hospital has an indigent fund for families who cannot pay. There is state assistance. However, those require a financial disclosure. You would have to prove you cannot afford the care. My mother recoiled as if he had slapped her. Absolutely not, she hissed. We are not applying for welfare. Do you know who we are? If the club found out we were on the indigent list, we would be laughingstocks. The board of directors at Richard's firm would hear about it. We cannot have a paper trail showing we are taking handouts. It is social suicide. I sat on the table, clutching my knees. I felt invisible. They were talking about me like I was a broken appliance that cost too much to fix, but they were too embarrassed to leave on the curb. So, Doctor, Keats said, his voice turning icy, you will not pay because it ruins your financial plan, and you will not accept aid because it ruins your reputation. What exactly do you suggest we do? Nora needs dialysis. Without it, her toxicity levels will rise, and she will go into a coma. That is not a negotiation. My father stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. He was silent for a long minute. When he turned back, his face was completely blank. It was the face he wore when he fired people. There is a third option, he said calmly. My mother looked at him. If she is a ward of the state, my father said, the state assumes full financial responsibility for her medical care. Correct. Doctor. Keats froze. He looked from my father to me, then back to my father. That, strictly speaking, that is true for children in the foster system. Doctor, Keats said, stumbling over the words. But that is for children who have no guardians, children who have been removed from unsafe homes. You are her parents. You are standing right here. My father buttoned his suit jacket. We are unable to provide for her medical needs. He stated, rehearsing the legal line, if we surrender custody, she becomes eligible for Medicaid immediately. The state pays for the dialysis. The state pays for the transplant. It does not touch our insurance cap. It does not touch Kendall's college fund. And because the records are sealed for minors in state care, no one at the club needs to know. I stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to vanish. You want to give her away, doctor? Keats asked, his voice rising in disbelief. You want to abandon your daughter to the foster system to save $200,000? It is the only logical solution, my mother said, catching on to my father's plan. Her voice became stronger, more confident now that she saw a way out. We are doing what is best for the family as a whole. Nora will get the care she needs. The government has deep pockets for this sort of thing, and we keep our lives intact. It is a win for everyone. I finally found my voice. It came out as a small, broken croak. "Mom," I whispered. She did not look at me. She looked at the wall behind me. "Mom, I'm scared," I said, louder this time. "Please, I don't want to go with strangers. I'm sick." My mother finally turned her head. Her eyes were dry. There was no warmth in them, only a glassy, detached resolve. She reached out and patted my knee, but her hand felt like it was touching a dirty surface. "You will be fine." "Nora," she said. Her tone was the same one she used when I scraped my knee as a toddler, dismissive and airy. "This is just logistics, honey. You are going to get excellent doctors. The state has to take care of you. It is the law. But you won't be there." I said, tears finally spilling over. "We have to focus on Kendall right now," she said, as if that explained everything. "She is so close to Stanford. You understand, don't you? We can't wreck her future just because you got sick. That wouldn't be fair to her." "Fair?" She used the word fair. "Doctor," Keats stepped between them and me. He looked like he wanted to punch my father. "I am calling social services," he said. "But let me be very clear with you people. This is not a paperwork shuffle. If you surrender custody, you are severing your parental rights. You do not get to visit when it is convenient. You do not get to act like parents when she recovers. You are abandoning her." "We understand the terms," my father said, checking his watch again. "How long will the social worker take?" "I have a tea time at 3 o'clock. "Doctor," Keats stared at him with pure hatred. "Get out," he said quietly. "I will handle the transfer. Just get out of my office." My father nodded, satisfied. "Come on. Helen." They stood up. My mother smoothed her skirt again. They walked toward the door. I watched them. I watched their backs. I willed them to stop. I willed my mother to turn around, to burst into tears, to say it was a mistake, to say she would sell the house, sell the cars, sell everything before she let her sick 13-year-old daughter face the world alone. She reached the door handle. She paused. My heart hammered against my ribs. She's going to turn back. I thought, she loves me. She opened the door. "Make sure they send the final bill for today to the office. Richard," she said to my father, "I don't want it coming to the house." And then they walked out. The door clicked shut with a soft, final sound. The silence that followed was deafening. It was heavier than the lead apron they used for x-rays. I sat there, the paper gown crinkling under my legs, the smell of antiseptic burning my nose. The physical pain in my kidneys was sharp, a gnawing ache that radiated through my back. But that pain was nothing compared to the sensation of my chest cracking open. It was not the disease that broke me in that moment. It was not the fear of needles or machines or surgery. It was the realization that my value to the people who made me could be calculated on a spreadsheet, and the total was not high enough to keep me. "Doctor," Keats turned back to me. His eyes were wet. He reached out and took my hand, his grip firm and warm. "I am so sorry." "Nora," he whispered. "I am so sorry." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stared at the closed door, realizing that the girl who walked into this room was gone. She had died, not from kidney failure, but from the sudden, violent amputation of her family, and in her place, something else was beginning to form. Something colder, something harder, something that would remember every single second of this betrayal until the day the debt was paid. The first night in the renal ward was not silent. People assume hospitals are quiet places at 3 a.m, but they are not. They are filled with a mechanical symphony of survival. To my left, an infusion pump clicked rhythmically, pushing fluids into my veins. To my right, the dialysis machine hummed a low, vibrating drone that felt like it was rattling my teeth. Down the hall, nurses' shoes squeaked against the linoleum, and occasionally, a distant alarm would blare, signaling that someone else's body was failing them, just like mine was failing me. I lay perfectly still in the dark, staring at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling. I had counted them 4 times. There were 142 tiles. The emptiness in my chest was heavier than the fluid building up in my tissues. My parents had been gone for 10 hours. By now, they were probably at home. My father was likely asleep, his conscience cleared by the logic of his ledger. My mother was probably checking her email or packing Kendall's trunk for boarding school. They had driven away, and the world had not stopped turning. The traffic lights outside still changed from red to green. The nurses still drank their coffee. The earth kept spinning. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. If I died in this bed tonight, if the toxins in my blood finally overwhelmed my heart and stopped it, the only thing that would change for the Whitfield family was that their insurance premiums would not go up. I was disposable. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to disappear into the mattress. I wanted to fade out. I wanted to be erased completely so I did not have to feel the shame of being the daughter who wasn't worth the investment. The door to my room slid open. It wasn't the tentative push of a volunteer or the hurried shove of a doctor on rounds. It was a steady, deliberate slide. Light from the hallway spilled across the floor, and a silhouette stepped in. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter, pretending to be asleep. I did not want pity. I did not want another social worker asking me how I felt about being a ward of the state. "Nora, I know you are awake," a voice said. It was not a soft, cooing voice. It was deep, textured, and calm. It sounded like the voice of someone who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. I opened my eyes. Standing at the foot of my bed was a woman who looked like she could hold up the ceiling if the building collapsed. She was not tall, but she had a presence that filled the room. She wore navy blue scrubs that were crisp and clean, and her dark hair was pulled back into a practical, no-nonsense bun. Her ID badge read, Gabriela Santos, RN. She did not smile at me. She did not give me the sad puppy dog eyes that the other nurses had been giving me all evening. She picked up my chart, checked the monitors, and then looked directly at me. Her eyes were dark and steady, refusing to look away or gloss over the reality of the situation. "My name is Gabby," she said. "I am your primary nurse for the night shift. I need to check your vitals, and I need you to tell me if your nausea is above a 5 on the scale." I blinked, surprised by her directness. "It's a 6, I whispered. She nodded, marking something down. "I will get you something for that. It will make you drowsy, but it will stop the room from spinning." She moved efficiently, adjusting the lines, checking the catheter site on my chest. Her hands were gentle but firm. She didn't treat me like glass. She treated me like a person who needed maintenance. When she finished, she pulled the rolling stool over to the side of the bed and sat down. "She didn't leave, Doctor. Keats told me the situation," she said. I looked away, staring at the wall. My face burned. The shame was a hot, prickly sensation on my neck. I didn't want to talk about it. "I'm not here to tell you it is going to be okay," she continued, her voice cutting through my embarrassment. I looked back at her. "People like to say that," she said. "They like to say everything happens for a reason or it will all work out. That is garbage. What happened today is terrible. It is unfair, and it is going to hurt for a long time. The treatment you are starting is going to be exhausting. You are going to be tired. You are going to be angry." She leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on her knees. "But here's what I can promise you. Nora, you are going to do this hard thing, and you are not going to do it alone. Not while I am on this floor. The dam inside me, which I had been holding up with sheer will since my parents walked out of Dr. Keats's office, suddenly cracked. A sob ripped out of my throat before I could stop it. It was an ugly, jagged sound. I covered my face with my hands. Mortified. I was a Whitfield. We did not cry in public. We did not show weakness to the help. But I wasn't a Whitfield anymore. I was just a sick kid in a dark room. I cried until my ribs ached. I cried for the life I was supposed to have, for the bedroom I would never sleep in again, for the parents who chose money over me, through it all. Gabby did not say a word. She did not hush me. She did not tell me to be brave. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out a box of tissues, and placed it within my reach. Then she sat there. She stayed. She became an anchor in the room, a solid point of gravity that kept me from floating away into the abyss of my panic. When the tears finally stopped, leaving me gasping and hiccuping, I wiped my face, feeling humiliatingly messy. "Sorry," I croaked. "Don't apologize for existing," Gabby said sharply. She stood up and poured a cup of water from the pitcher on the tray table. She handed it to me. "Drink. Dehydration makes the headache worse." I took a sip. The water was cool. "Why do you care?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm just a case file now." Gabby looked at me for a long moment. She seemed to be weighing whether to tell me something. Then, she sat back down. "I grew up in a neighborhood where sirens were the background music." She said, "My mother worked 2 jobs. My father was gone before I could walk. We didn't have much." She gestured to the hospital around us. "When I was 20, I was working as a nursing assistant. There was a boy, maybe 4 years old. Pneumonia. Bad lungs. His parents brought him in, dropped him off at the ER desk, and said they were going to move the car. They never came back. My breath caught in my throat. I watched that boy for 3 weeks," Gabby said, her eyes focusing on a memory I couldn't see. "He sat by the window every day waiting for a car that wasn't coming. The nurses were busy. The doctors were busy. Everyone made sure he had medicine and food, but no one had time to just be with him. I saw the light go out of his eyes. He got better physically, but inside, he just gave up." She looked back at me, her expression fierce. "I swore on my life that day that if I ever became a nurse, really became one, I would never let a child feel invisible on my watch. I don't care who signed what papers. You are in my bed. Nora, that makes you mine to protect." She stood up then, signaling the end of the conversation. "Now, rest. I will be at the station right outside your door. If you need me, you press that button. I will be here in 10 seconds. And she was. Over the next 2 days, Gabby Santos became the only constant in my disintegrating world. She didn't just do her job. She memorized me. She noticed on the second morning that the smell of the hospital eggs made me gag, so she quietly swapped my tray for oatmeal and toast before I even woke up. She realized that the red gelatin reminded me of blood, so she made sure I only got the green lime kind. She learned the rhythm of my fear. She figured out that around 2 in the morning, when the hospital was at its darkest, was when the panic attacks hit, without me asking. She started doing her charting in my room at that hour. She would drag the computer cart in, sit in the corner, and work quietly. The soft clicking of her typing became a lullaby. It told me I was safe. It told me someone was awake, standing guard against the monsters, but the outside world was closing in. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the door opened, and a woman in a gray business suit walked in. She looked exhausted. Her hair was frizzy, and she was carrying a stack of manila folders that looked heavy enough to break a table. "Nora," she asked, "I'm Tanya Merrick. I'm the social worker assigned to your case." Gabby was in the room, adjusting the flow on my dialysis catheter. She stopped what she was doing and moved to the head of the bed, standing just behind my shoulder. It was a subtle move, but it felt like a shield going up. "Hi," I said, gripping the sheet. Tanya sighed and pulled up a chair. She looked like a woman who had delivered too much bad news in her life and was tired of it. "I have been in contact with with Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield," Tanya said. She opened the folder. "The paperwork for the surrender of custody is being processed. They have signed the preliminary waiver of rights. It was official. The ink was drying." "So, where do I go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "An orphanage." "We don't call them that anymore," Tanya said gently. "It would be a group home, or a temporary foster placement. However, given your medical needs, it is complicated. Most foster families are not trained to handle home dialysis or the complex medication schedule you are on." She rubbed her temples. "Your parents are pushing for this to be expedited," she admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. They want the state to assume liability by the end of the week, so the insurance transfer is seamless. They are very efficient. Efficient. That was my father. So if you can't find a medical foster home, I asked, then you stay here. Tanya said, you become a boarder in the hospital until a placement opens up. It could be weeks. It could be months. I looked at the beige walls. The idea of living here, alone, surrounded by sickness, waiting for a stranger to decide they were willing to deal with my broken kidneys, felt like a prison sentence. I looked up at Gabby. Her face was unreadable. She was looking at Tanya, her eyes narrowing slightly. I cannot send her to a group home, Tanya muttered, looking at her notes. The infection risk is too high, and the hospital administration is going to pressure me to discharge her as soon as she is stable, because she is taking up an acute care bed. It was a trap. I was unwanted by my parents, and a logistical nightmare for the state. I can take her, a voice said. Tanya stopped shuffling papers. I froze. We both looked at Gabby. Excuse me, Tanya asked. I said, I can take her. Gabby repeated. Her voice was level, calm, and completely serious. I am a registered nurse with 15 years of experience in pediatric nephrology. I am certified for home dialysis. I know her protocol better than anyone. Tanya looked at Gabby's badge, then back at her face. Ms. Santos. That is very generous, but you are a staff member. There are boundaries. And do you even have a foster license? I have been a licensed emergency foster parent for the county for 2 years, Gabby said. I renewed my certification 6 months ago. My apartment has a spare room that passes inspection. I have no criminal record, and my finances are stable. She crossed her arms, standing tall in her scrubs. You said yourself, finding a medical placement will take months. You have a medically fragile child who has just experienced a massive trauma. Leaving her in a hospital room is cruel. Sending her to an untrained home is dangerous. Placing her with me is the safest, most logical option. The room went silent. I stared at Gabby, my heart hammering against my ribs. She was offering to take me home, not because she had to, not because she was paid to, but because she saw the boy in the window, and she was refusing to let me be him. Tanya blinked, processing the information. She looked from Gabby to me. She saw the way I was looking at the nurse like she was the only solid thing in a world of water. This would solve a lot of problems. Tanya admitted slowly, if your certification is active, I could petition for a kinship placement based on established rapport. It is unusual, but given the medical necessity. She looked at me. Nora. How do you feel about this? I looked at Gabby. She wasn't smiling. She was just watching me, offering me a lifeline without demanding I take it. Please, I whispered. I want to go with her. Tanya nodded. She closed the folder with a snap. Okay, I will draw up the emergency placement paperwork. I need to run it by the supervisor. But considering the alternative is a lawsuit if she gets an infection in a group home, they will approve it. Tanya stood up to leave. I will be back in an hour. When the door closed, I looked at Gabby. I didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed too small. Why seem too complicated? You do not have to do this. I said, I am a lot of work. Gabby walked over to the bed. She adjusted my blanket, tucking the edges in tightly, the way she knew I liked it. I know what work looks like. Nora, she said, I am not afraid of it. She checked the monitor one last time. Now, close your eyes. You need to sleep. When you wake up, we will worry about the rest, for the first time in 4 days. The knot of terror in my stomach loosened just enough to let me breathe. I looked at the woman standing guard beside my bed. She was not a fairy godmother. She was something better. She was a witness who refused to look away. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since my diagnosis, I fell asleep without wishing I wouldn't wake up. The paperwork was a stack of dead trees thick enough to doorstop a bank vault. But eventually, the ink dried. 3 days after my parents walked out of my life, I walked out of the hospital. I did not leave with a caravan of suitcases or a moving truck. I left with a single, pathetic plastic bag that contained a toothbrush, a comb, and 2 changes of clothes that Gabby had bought for me from the discount store down the street. The Whitfields had not sent my things. They had not sent my clothes, my journals, or the stuffed bear I had hidden under my bed since I was 5. They had simply erased me. The drive to Fort Collins was quiet. I sat in the passenger seat of Gabby's 10-year-old Honda Civic, watching the landscape shift from the gray concrete of the hospital district to the rolling, open plains of northern Colorado. The car smelled like vanilla air freshener and old coffee. It was a lived-in smell, messy and real, so different from the sterile lemon scent of my parents' house. We pulled up to a small, single-story bungalow with peeling yellow paint and a porch that leaned slightly to the left. It was not a mansion. It was not impressive. But as Gabby killed the engine, she looked at me and said something that stuck to my ribs. "This is not a waiting room. Nora, this is my home, and for as long as you need it, it is your home too." She led me inside. The living room was cluttered with books and colorful throw pillows. It felt warm. She walked me down a short hallway and opened a door. "This is your space," she said. I stepped inside. It was small, but someone Gabby had clearly spent the last 48 hours trying to scrub away the feeling of a guest room. The bed was made with a soft, fuzzy purple blanket. There was a stack of paperback novels on the nightstand, mostly fantasy stories about girls discovering they had magic powers. And there, pinned to the corkboard above the small wooden desk, was a piece of white cardstock. On it, written in bold, black marker, were 3 words: "You are safe here." I stared at the sign. My throat felt tight. "I don't have any money to pay you back," I said, my voice rough. "The Whitfields cut me off. I checked. My account is at 0. Gabby turned to me, her expression hardening instantly. She walked over, placed her hands on my shoulders, and looked me dead in the eye. "Listen to me," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "We are going to get one thing straight right now. You are not a tenant. You are not a debtor. You are not a business transaction. You are a child who is healing. But the food," I stammered, "the medicine, the electricity. I am the adult," she interrupted firmly. "You are the kid. My job is to keep the lights on and the fridge full. Your job is to keep your kidneys working and finish your homework. That is the deal. Do not insult me by thinking I'm keeping a tab." She squeezed my shoulders once, then let go. "Now, unpack your bag. I am making tacos." That was the beginning of the montage of my new life. It wasn't a movie montage set to upbeat music. It was a gritty, exhausting sequence of survival. Our lives began to revolve around the refrigerator. It was a white, humming beast covered in magnets. But the centerpiece was a massive dry erase calendar that Gabby had drawn. It looked like a battle map. Every single square was filled with color-coded scribbles. Red ink was for dialysis appointments. Blue ink was for medication times. Green ink was for schoolwork. Black ink was for Gabby's shift schedule. That calendar was the only thing keeping me alive. My autoimmune condition was a monster that did not sleep. The fatigue was a physical weight, like wearing a lead vest 24 hours a day. There were mornings when I could not lift my head off the pillow because my blood pressure had bottomed out. There were nights when I threw up until my throat was raw because the new medication was fighting with my stomach lining. Through it all, Gabby was a machine. She would wake me up at 5 in the morning to check my vitals before she went to her shift. She would leave sticky notes on the bathroom mirror. "Drink your water. Take the blue pill. You are strong." She would come home after 12 hours on her feet, smelling of disinfectant and exhaustion, and the first thing she would do was check my ankles for swelling. She never sighed. She never rolled her eyes. She never looked at me with that burdened look my father used to give me when he had to drive me to soccer practice. But the sickness had a cost beyond the physical. I was falling behind. The private school I used to attend had quietly unenrolled me the moment my tuition check stopped coming. The public school system was an option, but my immune system was so shot that Dr. Keats forbade me from stepping foot in a crowded cafeteria. I was stuck in limbo. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a math textbook I had checked out from the library. The numbers were swimming. I slammed the book shut, tears stinging my eyes. I'm going to be stupid, I whispered to the empty room. I'm going to be a dropout. Gabby walked in, carrying a basket of laundry. She set it down and looked at the book. What is the problem? She asked. I don't get it, I said, gesturing at the page. And I'm 3 months behind everyone else. I'm never going to catch up. I should just get a job at a diner and forget about college. Gabby sat down opposite me. She didn't offer empty comfort. She pulled the book toward her. My mother cleaned houses so I could go to nursing school. She said, I did not scrub bedpans for 20 years so you could give up on algebra because you are tired. She opened the book. We are going to do homeschooling, she announced. I already filed the paperwork with the district. But you work all day, I argued. Then we study at night, she said simply. And we did, every night, after dinner. The kitchen table became a classroom. Gabby wasn't a teacher, but she was tenacious. We learned history while she folded scrubs. We did biology while my dialysis machine hummed in the background. When I was too weak to sit up, she would lie next to me in my bed and read English literature out loud, doing different voices for the characters until I laughed. She was stitching the gaps in my education together with sheer willpower. A few weeks later, Tanya Merrick, the social worker, came for a home visit. She sat on the lumpy beige sofa, looking around at the small but clean living room. She seemed impressed, but wary. Nora is doing well, Tanya said, looking at my chart, better than expected. Honestly, but Gabby, we need to talk about the long game. I was sitting in the hallway, listening. I knew I shouldn't, but old habits from the Whitfield house died hard. The state is moving to terminate parental rights fully, Tanya continued. The Whitfields are not contesting it. In fact, their lawyer sent over the surrender documents this morning. They are done. I felt a cold spike in my chest. Even expecting it, hearing it out loud was like being punched. So, Tanya said, her voice gentle, we need to look at permanent placement, adoption. I held my breath. Gabby didn't hesitate. I am adopting her. Tanya sighed. Gabby, listen to me. You are a single woman on a nurse's salary. You are renting. The state looks for 2-parent households. Financial assets. Stability. The process to approve a single parent for a medically complex child is a nightmare. It could take years. They will audit your finances. They will dig into your past. They will make you jump through hoops of fire. Let them bring the hoops, Gabby said. Her voice was cold steel. It is going to be very hard, Tanya warned. I do not care if it takes 10 years, Gabby said. She is not going anywhere. She is already home. If I have to fight the state of Colorado, I will. If I have to fight the Whitfields, I will. I am going the distance. I leaned my head against the wall, closing my eyes. She wants me. I thought, she really wants me. But wanting me was expensive. A week later, I woke up in the middle of the night. The house was quiet, but I heard a low murmur coming from the kitchen. I crept out of bed, careful not to make the floorboards creak. Gabby was on the phone. She was standing by the window, looking out at the street lamp. She sounded tired. Yes, I know it is a double shift, she was saying. I can take the Saturday night rotation too, and the holiday pay for Thanksgiving, put me down for that. She paused, listening to the person on the other line. No, I am not saving for a trip, she said, rubbing her forehead. I need the overtime. The insurance covers the dialysis, but the copays on the anti-rejection meds are climbing. And she needs a high-protein diet. That stuff is not cheap. Just give me the hours. Susan, I will sleep when I'm dead. She hung up and leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window. I stood in the shadows, my heart breaking. My parents had millions of dollars, and they wouldn't pay a dime. Gabby had nothing, and she was selling her sleep, her health, and her holidays just to make sure I had good meat and the right pills. She wasn't buying herself nice things. She wasn't saving for a new car. She was working herself into the ground to keep me alive. I went back to bed and cried into my pillow, but this time, it wasn't because I was sad. It was because I was grateful. and the weight of that gratitude was almost too big to carry. The turning point came 3 nights later. I had a bad reaction to a new medication. My body felt like it was on fire. My joints ached so bad I wanted to scream. I had spent 4 hours tossing and turning, sweating through my sheets. Gabby had been there every second, wiping my forehead with a cool cloth, holding a basin while I retched, murmuring soft Spanish words I didn't understand but felt in my bones. Finally, around 4 in the morning, the fever broke. The pain receded to a dull throb. I blinked my eyes open. The room was dim, lit only by the street lamp outside. Gabby was sitting in the hard wooden chair next to my bed. She had pulled it up close so she could reach me. Her head was lolling to the side, her mouth slightly open. She was fast asleep. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes that even the shadows couldn't hide. She was still wearing her scrubs from the shift she had finished 10 hours ago. She hadn't left. She hadn't gone to her own comfortable bed. She had stayed in that uncomfortable chair, holding vigil over me, just in case I woke up and needed water. I looked at her, this stranger who had stepped in when my own blood turned their backs. I looked at her rough hands, her messy hair, the sheer, stubborn love radiating from her exhausted form. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched her arm. "Mom," I whispered. "It was an accident. It slipped out before I could check it. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was my soul recognizing its true north." Gabby jerked awake instantly. Her eyes snapped open, alert and ready. "Nora, what is it? Are you okay? Do you need the basin?" I looked at her. And I realized I couldn't take it back, and I didn't want to. "No," I said, my voice raspy. "I'm okay. The pain is gone." Gabby let out a long breath, her shoulders slumping. Thank God. She reached for the water cup and held the straw to my lips. I drank, watching her. "I called you Mom," I said quietly. Gabby froze. The cup hovered in the air for a second. She looked at me, her dark eyes searching my face. There was a moment of absolute silence in the room, heavier and more profound than any silence in the Whitfield mansion. "I know," she whispered. "Is that okay?" I asked. Gabby set the cup down. She reached out and brushed a strand of sweaty hair off my forehead. Her hand was warm. "Nora," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Being your mother is the only title I have ever wanted." She leaned forward and kissed my forehead. "Now go back to sleep. Mi hija. I am right here." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I understood something fundamental. Family wasn't about whose DNA you carried. It wasn't about last names or bloodlines or inheritance. Family was a verb. It was the act of staying. It was the people who sat in the chair when it was uncomfortable. It was the people who claimed you when everyone else let go. The paperwork was moving forward. The lawyers were fighting. But in that dark room, under a purple blanket, the verdict was already in. I was home. Returning to public high school after a year of isolation felt less like an educational milestone and more like entering a gladiator arena armed with nothing but a binders and a scar on my chest where the catheter used to be. The rumors had arrived before I did. Small towns and suburban enclaves run on gossip, and the story of the Whitfield girl being discarded like a broken toy was premium fuel for the grapevine. I walked down the hallway on my first day back, clutching my schedule so hard the paper turned damp. I could hear them. It was not paranoia. It was the distinct, hushed frequency of teenagers sharing a scandal. "That is her," a girl whispered by the lockers, "the one whose parents just bounced." "I heard she is dying," a boy replied, not even bothering to lower his voice. "I heard she cost too much money." They looked at me like I was a ghost or a contagion. In their world, parents were annoying ATM machines who grounded you for bad grades. The idea that parents could simply resign from the job was terrifying to them. I was a walking reminder that their safety nets were not as invincible as they thought. I did not scream at them. I did not cry in the bathroom. I went to my locker, dialed the combination, and made a silent vow. I would not engage. I would not be the victim they wanted to pity or the pariah they wanted to shun. I would be a machine. If my parents had abandoned me because I was a bad investment, I was going to make myself into an asset so valuable that the world would have no choice but to pay attention. I treated school like a war zone. My weapon of choice was a highlighter. Gabby saw the shift in me. She saw the way I sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, memorizing history dates and chemical formulas until my eyes burned. She did not tell me to slow down. She knew I was running a race against a genetic disadvantage and a social stigma. Instead of platitudes, she gave me ammunition. She became a hunter of opportunities. Gabby did not have money for private tutors or SAT prep courses, but she had a relentless ability to navigate bureaucracy. She spent her lunch break scouring the internet and community bulletin boards. "Look at this," she said one evening, sliding a flyer across the table. "The library has a free coding workshop on Tuesdays, and the university offers free math tutoring for high school students on Thursdays." I looked at her schedule on the fridge. "Mom," I said, testing the word that still felt fragile but right. "You work on Thursdays." I swapped shifts with Brenda. She said, not looking up from her chopping board, "I will drive you. You need calculus if you want to get into a top-tier program." She was not pushing me for the sake of a bumper sticker or a bragging right at a dinner party. She was pushing me because she knew what it felt like to be trapped by circumstance. "I want you to have choices. Nora," she told me once, when I fell asleep over my biology book, "poverty takes away your ability to choose. Sickness takes away your ability to choose. Education is the only thing that gives it back." So I took every choice she offered. I joined the debate team because it was free. I joined the school newspaper because I needed to learn how to control a narrative. It was in English. A P class that I finally found the voice I had lost in Dr. Keats' office. The assignment was a persuasive essay on a contemporary social issue. Most kids wrote about recycling or the dress code. I sat at my computer and typed out a title that made my hands shake: "The Price Tag on a Pulse, The Ethics of Medical Abandonment." I wrote about the system. I wrote about the loopholes that allowed guardians to sever ties when the bill got too high. I wrote about the feeling of being a line item on a budget. I did not use names, but the rage on the page was so specific, so raw, that when I handed it in, I felt lighter. 3 days later, Mr. Henderson, my English teacher, asked me to stay after class. He was a cynical man who usually graded papers with a red pen and a frown. He was holding my essay. "Did you write this?" "Nora," he asked. "Yes," I said, bracing myself for a critique on my grammar. "I have been teaching for 20 years," he said, taking off his glasses. "I have never read anything this angry that was also this controlled. You have a talent. Chavez, you argue like a prosecutor." He gave me an A+, but more importantly, he gave me a validation that had nothing to do with my bloodline, while I was building myself up brick by brick. I made the mistake of looking at what the Whitfields were doing. I found Kendall's social media profile during a moment of weakness in the computer lab. It was a window into the life I was supposed to have. There was Kendall, tanning on a beach in Cabo during spring break. There was Kendall, posing with a brand new convertible with a red bow on the hood for her 16th birthday. There was a family photo, my birth parents and Kendall, smiling at a gala, holding champagne flutes. The caption read, "So grateful for my supportive family, my rocks." I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. They looked so happy. They looked unburdened. There was no shadow in their eyes, no guilt weighing down their smiles. They had successfully amputated me, and the wound had healed over completely. They had not just abandoned me, they had forgotten me. I wanted to throw the monitor through the window. Instead, I printed the photo. I folded it into a tiny square and put it in my wallet. Every time I wanted to sleep in, every time I wanted to skip a study session, I touched that piece of paper. It was my battery. Then came the summer before my senior year. Mr. Henderson had nominated me for the National Student Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. It was a prestigious program, a direct pipeline to Ivy League admissions. I got the acceptance letter in the mail on a Tuesday. I read the first paragraph with a soaring heart. Then I read the second paragraph. The tuition for the program was $3,500. It might as well have been $3 million. I crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash can in the kitchen. When Gabby came home that night, she found it. She smoothed out the wrinkled paper on the counter. "Why is this in the garbage?" she asked. "Look at the price." "Mom," I said, chopping carrots aggressively, "we can barely cover the rent and the dialysis copays. It is fine. I do not need to go." Gabby looked at the letter, then at me. Her face set into that stubborn line I had come to love and fear. "You are going," she said. "We don't have the money," I argued. "I have a retirement account," she said. "It is not much, but it is enough." I dropped the knife. "No, absolutely not. You are not cashing out your retirement for a summer camp. I forbid it." Gabby laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "You forbid it. You are 16. Nora, you don't forbid me from doing anything. Listen to me. This is not a camp. This is a room where decisions are made. You belong in that room. I am not letting you stay in the hallway just because of money. But we will figure it out," she said firmly. "I picked up extra shifts at the urgent care center. We will make it work. You go. Mom pays. I went to D.C. I wore thrift store blazers and took notes on a notepad I got for free from a hotel, sitting next to kids whose fathers were senators. And I realized something terrifying and empowering. I was smarter than them. They had connections, but I had hunger. They debated policy as a theoretical exercise. I debated it as a matter of survival. When I came back, I joined the Student Advocacy Club. It was a small group of nerds who mostly argued about school lunch quality, but I steered them toward real issues. When a student was suspended for a dress code violation that clearly targeted her culture, I didn't just complain. I looked up the district bylaws. I found the precedent. I wrote a formal letter to the school board citing their own anti-discrimination policy. The principal called me into his office. He looked annoyed, but he also looked wary. He dropped the suspension, walking out of that office. I felt a rush of adrenaline that was better than any drug. I realized I didn't just want to write essays. I wanted to rewrite the rules. I wanted to use the law as a shield for people who had no one else to stand in front of them. I told Gabby that night over dinner, "I'm going to be a lawyer." She smiled, tired but proud. I figured, "You like to argue too much to be anything else." The next week, she took me to a small, nondescript office building downtown. It was not a glass tower. It was the office of the Community Legal Aid Society. She introduced me to a woman named Sarah Jenkins, a lawyer who spent her days fighting evictions and navigating Medicaid denials. Sarah was not wearing a designer suit. She looked overworked, just like Gabby. But when she spoke, she had a precision that was lethal. "Gabby told me you are interested in the law," Sarah said, leaning back in her creaking chair. "She says you have a story." I told her. Not the emotional version, but the factual one. The abandonment, the medical neglect, the ward of the state status. Sarah listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me over her glasses. "You are angry," she observed. "Yes," I said. "Good," she said. "Anger is fuel. But anger without evidence is just noise. If you want to survive in this world, Nora, especially against people with money like your birth parents, you need to understand one thing." She tapped a thick file on her desk. "The truth does not need to scream," she said. "It needs a file. It needs documentation. It needs dates, times, signatures, and receipts. The person with the best paper trail wins." That sentence changed my life. I went home and pulled out the plastic bin I kept under my bed. Until then, it had been a chaotic mess of painful memories. I dumped it out on the floor. I started organizing. I created a file for the medical bills the Whitfields had forwarded to me before I left. I created a file for the letters from the insurance company denying coverage. I found the copy of the voluntary surrender of parental rights document that Tanya had given me. I organized them chronologically. I highlighted the dates. I made copies. I wasn't planning to sue them. Not yet. I was just following instructions. I was building the file. I was making sure that if they ever tried to rewrite history, if they ever tried to say they did the best they could, I would have a box full of paper that proved they were liars. Senior year flew by in a blur of AP exams, dialysis treatments, and student council meetings. When the acceptance letters started arriving, I didn't open them alone. I waited for Gabby. We sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by envelopes. State University, accepted. Colorado College, accepted. And then, the big envelope, the thick one. Crestview University. Crestview was private. It was elite. It was expensive. It was the kind of place Kendall would go. My hands shook as I tore it open. Dear Ms. Chavez, it read. Chavez. I had legally changed my name 6 months ago, the day the adoption was finalized. Seeing it there, typed on official university letterhead, felt like looking at a victory flag. We are pleased to inform you of your acceptance into the class of 2026. I scanned down to the financial aid section, presidential scholarship, full tuition, housing stipend included. I looked up at Gabby. She was holding her breath. I got it, I whispered. I got a full ride. Gabby screamed. It was a loud, joyous sound that startled the neighbors. She tackled me in a hug, burying her face in my shoulder. We rocked back and forth on the floor, crying and laughing at the same time. We did it. She sobbed. We beat them. I held on to her, looking at the letter over her shoulder. Ms. Nora Chavez. I had done it. I had survived the hospital. I had survived the abandonment. I had survived the poverty and the sickness. I was going to college. I was going to study public policy and pre-law. I was going to learn how to break people like the Whitfields using their own rules. The underdog phase was over. The hunt was about to begin. Freshman year at Crestview University was supposed to be the clean slate. I had a new last name, a full scholarship, and a dorm room that smelled like lemon pledge and potential. I was Nora Chavez, the girl who beat the odds, the pre-law student who sat in the front row and actually did the reading. I thought I had left the wreckage of the Whitfield legacy behind me in that hospital room 3 years ago. I was wrong. The past does not just disappear. It waits for you to turn 18 so it can destroy your credit score. It started with a mundane errand. It was October of my first semester. I walked into the student credit union on campus, wearing my Crestview hoodie, feeling like a responsible adult. I needed a credit card, not for shopping sprees or spring break trips, but for emergencies. Gabby had taught me that. Build credit early, she had said. Good credit is freedom. I sat across from a loan officer named Marcus, a guy who looked like he was only a sophomore himself. I filled out the application with confidence. I had no debt. I had a stipend. I had a scholarship. I was the perfect low-risk candidate. Marcus typed my information into his computer. He hit enter. He smiled, waiting for the system to process. Then his smile dropped. He frowned, tapping the refresh key. He leaned closer to the screen, squinting. Is there a problem? I asked, clutching my backpack strap. I am not sure, Marcus said, his voice losing its customer service brightness. The system is giving me a hard rejection, like an immediate one. He turned the screen slightly away from me, a subtle gesture of privacy that made my stomach turn over. Ms. Chavez, have you had financial trouble before? He asked awkwardly. Maybe a bankruptcy? Or a repossession? I laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. I am 18 years old, I said. I have never owned a car or a house. I have never had a credit card. I don't have a history. Marcus looked at me with pity. That look again. I hated that look. Actually, he said quietly, you do. You have a very extensive history, and most of it is in collections. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands went numb, a sensation I had not felt since the days of my acute renal failure. That is impossible, I said. There must be a mistake. Maybe someone with the same name Marcus printed out a summary. He slid it across the desk, face down, like he was handing me a death certificate. You need to pull your full credit report, Nora, he advised, dropping the formality. But this shows 4 credit cards maxed out and charged off, a utility bill in default, a personal loan that went to a collection agency 2 years ago, I took the paper. I walked out of the credit union into the bright autumn sunlight. But the world felt gray. I went straight to the library. I found a corner terminal, hidden behind a stack of law journals. I logged onto the annual credit report site. My fingers were trembling so hard, I mistyped my social security number twice. When the file finally loaded, I stared at the screen. It was a massacre, according to the bureaus. Nora Whitfield, the name I had legally abandoned, had been a very busy teenager. There was a credit card opened 5 years ago. Limit, $5,000. Balance, $5,200 with interest. Status charged off. There was a cable bill for a premium package, unpaid for 6 months, sent to collections. There was a store credit card for a high-end electronics retailer, maxed out on a home theater system, never paid. I looked at the dates. The first account was opened 3 weeks after my parents left me at Rockbridge Regional Medical Center. I sat there, frozen. 3 weeks. I had been lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to a dialysis machine, vomiting from the toxins in my blood, crying because I thought nobody loved me. And while I was fighting to stay alive, someone had used my social security number to buy a flat-screen television. I scrolled down to the personal information section. I needed to see the address. I needed to be sure. There it was, the billing address for every single fraudulent account. 1402 Oakwood Drive, my parents' house. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. It was the taste of absolute clarity. They hadn't just abandoned me to save money on my medical bills. They had kept my identity as a souvenir. They had used their sick, discarded daughter as a financial loophole. They knew a minor's credit report is rarely checked. They knew I was a ward of the state, lost in the system. They figured by the time I was 18, the statute of limitations might be fuzzy, or I would be too poor and stupid to understand what had happened. They had monetized my existence after declaring me worthless. I printed everything, every page, every line item. The printer whirred, spitting out the physical proof of their greed. I took the bus home to Fort Collins that weekend. I didn't tell Gabby over the phone. I needed her to see it. When I laid the papers out on the kitchen table, Gabby went very still. She put on her reading glasses. She read the report slowly, her finger tracing the lines of debt. She saw the dates. She saw the address. The silence in the kitchen was terrifying. Gabby was a woman who got angry often at the system, at bad drivers, at politicians. But this was not normal anger. This was a quiet, dangerous fury. She stood up, walked to the sink, and gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. They bought a home theater system. She whispered. I didn't answer. They left you to die, Gabby said, her voice shaking. And then they went to the mall and used your name to buy speakers. She turned around. Her eyes were blazing. I want to kill them, she said. I am not speaking metaphorically. I want to drive there and burn that house down. Mom, I said. Standing up? No. She snapped. There are rules. Nora, there are lines. You leave a child. That is evil. But to steal from her to ruin her future before it even starts, that is a sickness. That is not human. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. She looked at me. What do you want to do? She asked. You have the right to be left alone. You have the right to walk away and let the 7 years pass until this falls off your report. But if you want to fight this... I looked at the stack of papers. I am not waiting 7 years. I said, this is my name. They stole it. I want it back. The next week, I started my internship at the Community Legal Aid Society early. I wasn't just fetching coffee anymore. I was a woman on a mission. I sat down with Sarah Jenkins, the lawyer who had told me about the power of paper trails. I showed her the file. Sarah looked at it. She let out a low whistle. This is textbook familial identity theft, Sarah said. We see it a lot. Unfortunately. Usually, it is a parent with a gambling problem or an addiction. But this, given who your parents are, this is just pure entitlement. She looked at me. Fixing this is not going to be pretty. Nora, To clear your record, you have to file a police report. You have to file an affidavit of identity theft with the Federal Trade Commission, and in that affidavit, you have to name the perpetrators. I nodded. I know. If you file this, the police will investigate. Sarah warned. Your parents, your birth parents will be contacted. It might turn into a criminal case. Fraud over a certain amount is a felony. I looked at the address on the report. 1402 Oakwood Drive, the house where I wasn't allowed to live. Do it, I said. For the next 6 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was a model student at Crestview, acing my intro to political science exams. By night, I was a forensic accountant of my own trauma. I learned the language of bureaucracy. I learned how to write a dispute letter that a credit bureau could not ignore. I learned the specific code sections of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, to whom it may concern. I typed, night after night, I am a victim of identity theft. The accounts listed below were opened when I was 13 years old and a ward of the state. I did not authorize these charges. I am attaching the police report number. I sent the letters by certified mail. I kept the green return receipt cards. I built a binder that was 3 inches thick. One by one, the accounts started to drop off. The banks, realizing they had issued credit cards to a 13-year-old, quietly erased the debts to avoid liability. They didn't want a lawsuit. They just scrubbed the data. My score began to heal. 500, 550, 600. But every time a debt was canceled, a notification was sent to the address on file. My birth parents were finding out that their free ride was over. Then, just before finals week, my phone pinged. I was in the library, deep in a case study about property law. I checked my email. The sender name made my heart stop. Richard Whitfield. I hadn't heard from him in 4 years. Not a birthday card, not a Christmas greeting, not a single word since he checked his watch in Dr. Keats's office. The subject line was simple. Thinking of you. My hands went cold. I opened it. Nora, I hope this email finds you well. Your mother and I heard through the grapevine that you are at Crestview. We were so proud to hear that. We always knew you had the intellect for a top-tier school. That is the Whitfield gene. After all, I felt bile rise in my throat. The Whitfield gene. The same gene that gave me the autoimmune disease they refused to pay to treat. We have been thinking about you a lot lately. The email continued. It has been a long time, and we know things were complicated in the past. We were in a difficult position, and we did what we thought was necessary for everyone's survival, but we would love to reconnect. Perhaps we could meet for coffee. There are some family matters we should discuss. Love, Dad. I stared at the screen. Family matters. He didn't want to reconnect. He wasn't overcome with paternal love. He had received the letters from the credit card companies. He knew the fraud department was looking into the accounts. He knew that if I pressed charges, if I testified that I never authorized those expenses, he and my mother were looking at potential jail time, or at the very least, a massive public scandal that would ruin their precious reputation at the country club. He was scared, and the line about survival that was the hook. He was trying to frame their abandonment as a tragedy that happened to them. Not a choice they made. He wanted to meet so he could talk me out of the police report, or maybe he wanted to offer me a settlement. A little hush money to make the problem go away. Can we talk? It was a trap. If I replied, if I agreed to meet, I was opening the door. I was giving them access. I hovered my mouse over the reply button. I wanted to type, "Did you enjoy the home theater system?" I wanted to type, "I am not a Whitfield anymore." I wanted to type, "Go to hell." But then I heard Sarah's voice in my head. The truth doesn't scream. It needs a file. If I responded, I was engaging emotionally. If I responded, I was giving them a chance to manipulate me. I moved the mouse. I clicked forward. I sent the email to my own secure archive folder, the one labeled Evidence. I did not reply. I did not delete it. I saved it, because I understood something now that 13-year-old Nora didn't. When a predator contacts you, they are not looking for redemption. They are looking for a weakness. He wanted to know if I was still the scared little girl who cried when they left. He wanted to know if I could be bought. My silence was the only answer he was going to get, and it was going to terrify him more than any scream ever could. I closed the laptop, packed my bag, and walked out of the library. My credit score was 680 and climbing. My conscience was clear, and my file on the Whitfields just got one page thicker. By my junior year at Crestview, the adrenaline that had fueled my survival since I was 13 began to curdle into something heavier. I was running on caffeine and spite, maintaining a 4.0 grade point average while tracking my credit score like a hawk. I thought I was the one carrying the weight of the world. I was wrong. I was only carrying half of it. Gabby was carrying the rest, and her knees were finally buckling. It happened on a Tuesday in November. I came home early from a study group because a snowstorm was rolling in over the Rockies, turning the roads into sheets of black ice. The house was quiet. Gabby was supposed to be at the hospital for her swing shift, but her car was in the driveway. I walked into the bathroom to wash my hands and saw it. Sitting on the edge of the porcelain sink was a bright orange prescription bottle. The cap was off. I froze. Gabby did not take medicine. In the 8 years I had lived with her, I had never seen her take so much as an aspirin. She was the provider, the healer, the iron pillar that held the roof up. Pillars did not get sick. I picked up the bottle. It was a high-dose beta blocker, prescribed for hypertension and arrhythmia. The date on the label was from yesterday. I heard a floorboard creak behind me. I turned around. Gabby was standing in the doorway, wearing her bathrobe. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her skin, usually a warm olive tone, looked gray and papery. There were deep lines carved around her mouth that I had somehow managed to ignore for months. "Put that down." "Nora," she said, her voice lacking its usual command. "How long?" I asked, holding the bottle up. "How long have you had a heart condition?" She sighed, walking over to take the bottle from my hand. She capped it with a sharp click. "My blood pressure has been creeping up for a year," she admitted. Refusing to meet my eyes, "The doctor says it is stress. Years of cortisol. Years of double shifts and sleeping in chairs and eating vending machine food." She walked past me into the kitchen, moving with a stiffness that terrified me. I followed her. "You are sick because of me," I said. The words tasted like ash. "You worked those double shifts to pay for my dialysis. You worked the holidays to pay for my textbooks. You broke your body to fix mine." Gabby turned on the kettle. She leaned against the counter, looking out the window at the falling snow. "I did what a mother does," she said quietly. "I do not regret a single hour of it, but—" She paused, and the silence stretched tight between us. "But the engine is sputtering." "Nora," she whispered, "I cannot keep up the pace. The hospital wants me to move to an administrative role, desk work, case management. It pays significantly less. No overtime, no holiday bonuses." She turned to face me, and I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of dying, but fear of failing me. "I have to slow down," she said. "But if I do not know how we cover your final year. I do not know how we pay the rent." I looked at this woman who had saved my life. I looked at the gray in her hair and the tremor in her hands. She had spent her vitality to buy my future. I walked over and took her hands. They were cold. "You are done," I said firmly. "You take the desk job. You take the weekends off. You sleep for 8 hours a night." "But the bills—" She started to protest. "I am not 13 anymore," I interrupted. "It is my turn to carry the load." The next day, I picked up 2 part-time jobs. I worked the graveyard shift at the undergraduate library front desk from 10 at night until 4 in the morning, 3 days a week, on weekends. I transcribed legal depositions for a local court reporting firm. My life became a blur of time management. I slept in 2-hour bursts. I read constitutional law textbooks while checking student IDs at the library turnstile. I listened to lectures on my headphones while I walked to the bus stop in the freezing wind. It was brutal. It was exhausting. And for the first time, I truly understood the magnitude of Gabby's sacrifice. Every time my eyes burned from staring at a screen, I thought of Gabby sitting in that hospital chair. Every time my back ached from a double shift, I remembered Gabby walking on swollen feet to bring me medication. I learned that love is not a feeling. Love is the ability to endure pain so someone else does not have to. I finished my undergraduate degree with highest honors, fueled by a mixture of gratitude and desperation. And then, the letter came. Crestview University School of Law. I stood by the mailbox, shivering in the spring breeze. Holding the thick envelope, I tore it open. Congratulations. Full tuition scholarship. Stipend for living expenses. I didn't scream this time. I just leaned against the mailbox and exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 4 years. The stipend was generous. It was enough to cover my share of the rent. It was enough to let Gabby retire from the floor completely. I chose my specialization immediately, health law and patient rights. I wanted to know exactly how the system worked so I could dismantle it from the inside. In my first semester of law school, I took a seminar called Child Welfare and State Liability. It was taught by Professor Alistair Vance, a legend in the field who had spent 30 years rewriting foster care legislation. He was a terrifying man with eyebrows like hawk's wings and a mind like a steel trap. One afternoon, I went to his office hours to discuss a paper I was writing on medical abandonment statutes. Professor Vance was reading my file. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Sit down. Ms. Chavez," he grunted. I sat. "I read your personal statement," he said. Closing the folder. "You were a state ward. Medical surrender." "Yes, sir," I said. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You know," he said slowly, "I remember your case, not by name, but by the circumstances. It made the rounds in the department. It is rare for wealthy parents to successfully execute a medical surrender without immediate legal blowback. They were efficient," I said bitterly. "They knew the loopholes." Professor Vance looked at me. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and filled with a strange kind of pity. "Loopholes are only loopholes if you close them behind you," he said cryptically. "What do you mean?" I asked. He leaned forward. "When the state assumes custody of a child for medical reasons, the state becomes the primary provider, but the biological parents are not absolved of financial responsibility. The state sends a bill. It is called a reimbursement order. The taxpayers front the cost, but the parents are legally required to pay it back, based on their income." I sat up straighter. "I never knew that. I assumed they paid it." I said, "They have money. It would have been cheaper than the private insurance cap." Professor Vance tapped his desk. I was curious. He said, "So I made a call to a friend of mine at the Department of Human Services. I asked about the reimbursement file for the Whitfield case. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, and I asked, 'It is flagged as uncollectible,' he said. 'Uncollectible,' I repeated. 'My father is an investment banker. He just bought a vacation home in Aspen.'" Professor Vance nodded. "Exactly. The state sent the invoices for 3 years of dialysis, for the transplant surgery, for the medications. We are talking about nearly $500,000 in state funds." He paused to let the numbers sink in. The invoices were returned. Address unknown. Recipient moved. No forwarding address. I frowned. "That is impossible. They lived in the same house for 20 years. I sent my credit dispute letters there." Professor Vance smiled. But it was a cold, wolfish smile. "Did you notice how your parents handle their mail? Do they use a post office box? A corporate address?" I thought back. My father used his firm's address for almost everything. "Here is what I suspect happened," Vance said. "When they surrendered you, they likely listed a temporary mailing address or a lawyer's office as their point of contact. Then, they closed that box. When the state sent the bills, they bounced. The state bureaucracy is slow and overwhelmed. After 3 or 4 attempts, if they cannot locate the debtor, the file gets tossed into a suspended pile. It sits there, gathering dust." He leaned back in his chair. "Your parents did not just abandon you. Nora. They defrauded the state of Colorado. They let the taxpayers people like your nurse mother pay for your kidneys while they kept their millions in offshore accounts. They stole from the public trust. I felt the room spin. It wasn't just personal anymore. It wasn't just about them hurting me. It was about them robbing the very system that had saved me. They had forced Gabby to work double shifts to pay taxes that supported the Medicaid fund, while they, the millionaires, dodged the bill. They are thieves, I whispered. Yes, Vance said. And right now, they are getting away with it because no one has triggered a review of the file. He pushed a sticky note across the desk. On it was a phone number and a name. This is the auditor for the State Recovery Unit, Vance said. If someone were to provide them with a current, verified address for the Whitfields, and perhaps a copy of their recent property tax assessments, proving they have been in the jurisdiction the whole time, the state might decide to reopen the case. I stared at the note. If they do, Vance added, the interest and penalties on a 10-year-old debt of $500,000 would be astronomical, and it would be a matter of public record. I took the note. My hand was shaking, but not from fear, from power. I walked out of his office and sat on a bench in the quad. The winter sun was bright and blinding. I had a choice. I could burn the note. I could graduate, become a lawyer, and live my life. I could let the Whitfields stay in their bubble, thinking they had won. I could choose peace. Gabby would want me to choose peace. She would say, "Let it go. Nora, we are happy. Do not drink poison waiting for them to die." But then I thought about Gabby's heart medicine. I thought about the way she looked when she came home after a 16-hour shift, gray and shaking. I thought about the vacation she never took. I thought about the retirement account she drained to send me to that leadership summit. My parents had stolen Gabby's health just as surely as they had stolen my childhood. They had forced her to carry a financial burden that belonged to them. Peace without justice is just submission. I was done submitting. I took out my phone. I dialed the number on the sticky note. State Recovery Unit. This is Linda. A voice answered. Hi, Linda, I said, my voice steady and cold. My name is Nora Chavez. I have some information regarding a dormant file involving substantial unpaid liabilities by Richard and Helen Whitfield. I believe you have been looking for them. I gave her the address. I gave her my father's work number. I gave her everything. I hung up the phone and looked at the sky. I wasn't doing this to be petty. I wasn't doing this to be cruel. I was doing this because the ledger had to be balanced. They wanted to erase me. Fine. I would make sure that when the state of Colorado finally came for them, my name would be on every single sheet of paper they were served. I walked back to the library. I had a torts exam to study for, and for the first time in years, I felt completely, utterly calm. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for them to walk into it. The final semester of law school was a blur of caffeine, case law, and the terrifying realization that I was about to become an actual lawyer. The competition at Crestview Law was blood sport. We were not just students. We were sharks in training, circling the top rankings with sharp teeth. But when the final grades were posted, there was no blood in the water. There was just my name at the top of the list. Valedictorian. It was the ultimate vindication. The girl who was supposed to die of renal failure in a state ward bed had outworked every legacy admission and trust fund baby in the program. I was sitting in the dean's office when he gave me the news. He was a kind man with a bow tie who loved the pageantry of commencement. Ms. Chavez, he said, beaming, you will lead the procession, and of course, you will deliver the address. We have allocated a block of VIP tickets for your family. I assume your mother, Ms. Santos, will be attending. Absolutely. I said, excellent, he said. He shuffled some papers on his desk, looking slightly uncomfortable. There is one small administrative matter. We received an email yesterday from a Mr. Richard Whitfield. The air in the room instantly grew colder. I sat very still. He claims to be your biological father, the dean said. Watching my reaction carefully, he stated that he and his wife would like to attend the ceremony. He mentioned that they have been estranged, but are eager to support you in this milestone. He asked to be seated in the family section. I looked at the dean. I could see the question in his eyes. He knew I was adopted. He knew my legal name was Chavez, but he did not know the gruesome details of how the transfer of power had occurred. I can tell him no. The dean offered quickly. I can tell him the event is at capacity. You are the priority here. Nora, I thought about it. My first instinct was to burn the email. My second instinct was to have Gabby drive over there and flatten their tires. But then, a different thought took root. A colder, sharper thought. If I banned them, they would spin it. They would tell their friends at the country club that they tried to reach out, but their ungrateful daughter pushed them away. They would play the victims. They would remain the noble, suffering parents who had been estranged by a rebellious child. I did not want them to be victims. I wanted them to be witnesses. Let them come, I said. The dean looked surprised. Are you sure? Yes, I said, but I have conditions. I walked home that evening with the mind of a strategist planning a siege. When I told Gabby, she dropped the spatula she was holding. It clattered loudly against the stove. You did what she asked, her eyes wide. I approved their tickets. I said, setting my bag down, they will be in the front row. Nora, have you lost your mind? Gabby asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel aggressively. These people are toxic. They do not deserve to breathe the same air as you. They are coming to take credit, you know that, right? They want to stand next to you in the photos so they can brag to their investment banker friends. I know, I said calmly. Then why? Gabby demanded. Why give them the satisfaction? Because I am not giving them a photo op. Mom, I said, I am giving them a front row seat to the truth. I pulled out the seating chart I had sketched on a napkin. They think they are coming to see Nora Whitfield, the prodigal daughter who finally made good. They think they are going to smile, clap, and maybe hand me a check afterward to smooth things over. They think they can buy their way back into the narrative because the investment finally matured. I looked at Gabby. I want them to see exactly what they threw away, and I want them to see exactly who picked it up. Gabby looked at me for a long minute. She saw the steel in my spine. She saw the lawyer I had become. Okay, she said slowly, but if they try to touch you, I am going to prison. I smiled. They won't get close enough to touch me. The next day, I met with the event coordinator. I handed her a specific set of instructions regarding the VIP section. Number 1, I said, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield are to be seated in the first row, directly in front of the podium. Done, she said, typing into her tablet. Number 2, I continued, there is to be absolutely no backstage access for them. No pre-ceremony holding room. No post-ceremony private meet and greet. They enter with the general public, they sit, and they leave. If they try to bypass security to get to the graduate holding area, they are to be removed. The coordinator nodded, looking a bit terrified. Understood. Strict perimeter. Number 3, I said, and this was the most important part. I need 2 more tickets for the VIP row, right next to the Whitfields. Who are they for? She asked. The Evans family. I said. The coordinator didn't ask who the Evans family was. She just added them to the list. But Gabby knew, and I knew, the Evans family were strangers to me. Until 3 months ago, when I started law school, I had access to the LexisNexis database and a newfound courage. I had petitioned the organ donor registry to unseal the contact information for the family of the donor who had saved my life when I was 14. It was a long shot. Most donor families prefer anonymity. But they had agreed to contact. Their son, Michael, had died in a motorcycle accident the same night my kidneys finally shut down. He was 16. He was an athlete. He had bright red hair and a laugh that his mother said could shake a room, because his parents said yes to donation in the worst moment of their lives. I was standing here today. I had written to them. We had exchanged letters. I told them I was graduating. I told them that their son's kidney had powered me through all-nighters and bar prep exams. I invited them. They said yes. The setup was perfect. On one side of the aisle, the parents who gave me life and then decided it was too expensive to maintain. On the other side, the parents who gave me life at the cost of their own son. Without asking for a dime, I wanted the Whitfields to sit next to them. I wanted the contrast to be so blinding it burned. The week before graduation, I wrote my speech. I did not write a standard speech about chasing dreams or changing the world. I wrote a closing argument. I sat in my small apartment, the same one Gabby and I shared, and typed until my fingers ached. I structured it like a legal oath. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I practiced it in the mirror. I practiced the pauses. I practiced the inflection. I needed to be surgical. If I screamed, I looked unhinged. If I cried, I looked weak. I had to be cold, professional, and devastating. I also made a specific request to the registrar's office regarding the program. Please ensure the name is printed correctly. I told the clerk, and please ensure the announcer reads exactly what is on the card. She checked the file. Nora Chavez. Is that correct? Yes. I said, and the Whitfields have no idea, she asked. Lowering her voice, I smiled. No, they do not. The morning of graduation arrived with a sky so blue it looked painted. The air was crisp. I put on my gown. I adjusted the velvet hood of the Juris Doctor. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look like the scared girl in the hospital gown anymore. I looked like a force of nature. Gabby came in. She was wearing a new dress, a deep royal blue that made her look majestic. She had tears in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You are ready, she said. We drove to the university. The campus was swarming with families. Balloons, flowers, cameras. It was a festival of pride. I went to the staging area backstage. I peeked through the curtain. Just like I had planned. I found them immediately. The Whitfields had arrived early. Of course they had. They wanted to be seen. My birth father, Richard, was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost $4,000. He was shaking hands with the man next to him, the dean of the medical school, laughing that practiced. Boardroom laugh. He looked comfortable. He looked like he owned the place. My birth mother, Helen, was wearing a cream Chanel suit. She looked impeccable. She was holding a bouquet of roses that was comically large. She was scanning the program, running her finger down the list of names. I watched her pause. She frowned. She flipped the page. She flipped back. She was looking for Nora Whitfield. She wouldn't find it. The program was alphabetical. Chavez was on page 3. Whitfield would have been on page 10. She leaned over to Richard and whispered something. He shrugged, looking dismissive. He probably told her it was a typo, or that I was listed under a different distinction. Their arrogance wouldn't allow them to consider that the name was gone. Then, I saw the Evans family arrive. Mr. and Mrs. Evans looked different. They were not wearing designer clothes. Mr. Evans wore a slightly ill-fitting brown suit, and Mrs. Evans wore a simple Sunday dress. They looked nervous. They walked to the VIP row, checking their tickets. They stopped at the seats right next to the Whitfields. Richard looked at them with a subtle sneer. He pulled his legs in, creating a physical barrier, as if poverty might be contagious. He didn't nod. He didn't say hello. He just turned his shoulder, excluding them from his space. I watched Mr. Evans sit down. He looked at the empty stage with a reverence that Richard couldn't comprehend. Mr. Evans wasn't there to network. He was there to see if his son's sacrifice had meant something. The visual was perfect. The parasitic parents next to the donor parents. The takers next to the givers. Gabby took her seat on the other side of the Evans family. She introduced herself. I saw her shake their hands. I saw Mrs. Evans wipe a tear away. I saw Gabby touch her arm gently. My birth parents ignored the interaction entirely. They were too busy checking their phones. Richard checked his watch. He tapped the screen. He was likely checking the market, or maybe calculating how long this ceremony would take before he could corner me and ask about the misunderstanding regarding the credit card fraud investigation. He had no idea that the trap had already snapped shut. I stepped back from the curtain. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. It was a strong heartbeat. It was a borrowed heartbeat, gifted by a boy named Michael and sustained by a woman named Gabby. It did not belong to the Whitfields. Not a single pulse of it belonged to them. They were sitting out there, waiting for their return on investment. They wanted a happy ending. They wanted the narrative where the family is reunited, the past is forgiven, and the successful daughter brings honor to the dynasty. They were about to learn that in a court of law, and in the court of life, you cannot cross-examine the truth when it is standing right in front of you. I walked to the line of graduates. The music started. Pomp and circumstance. I adjusted my cap. I took a deep breath. I am not going out there to give a speech. I told myself, I am going out there to deliver a verdict. The procession began. I walked into the light. The dean adjusted his glasses, the stage lights reflecting off the lenses. He looked down at the index card in his hand. The one I had specifically ensured was accurate. He cleared his throat, and the sound echoed through the massive auditorium, silencing the murmur of thousands of families. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice projecting with the weight of finality, "it is my distinct honor to introduce the valedictorian of the class of 2026. Please welcome Nora Chavez." The name hung in the air like a physical object. Chavez. I was standing at the podium, gripping the wood, but my eyes were locked on the front row. The massive screens on either side of the stage were broadcasting a live feed of the VIP section, and the camera operator, bless his cinematic soul, had zoomed in right on the center seats. My birth mother, Helen, did not blink. She froze. It was as if someone had reached into her chest and stopped her heart manually. Her mouth opened slightly, shaping a word that never came out. She looked at the program in her lap, then up at me, then back at the program. The cognitive dissonance was shattering her composure in real time. She had come here to see Nora Whitfield. She had come to claim the victory of the Whitfield bloodline. Instead, she was hearing the name of the woman she considered the help. My birth father, Richard, went rigid. The polite boardroom smile he had plastered on his face slipped, revealing a flash of genuine, ugly confusion. He turned to Helen, his eyebrows drawn together, silently asking, did he just say Chavez? The applause began. It started from the back, from the students who knew me, who knew my work ethic, and it rolled forward like a tidal wave. I waited. I let them clap. I let Richard and Helen sit in that noise, drowning in a standing ovation for a name they hated. When the room finally quieted, leaving a silence so heavy you could hear the hum of the speakers, I leaned into the microphone. "Good morning, faculty, families, and the graduating class of 2026, I began. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a lawyer who knows she has already won the case before the opening statement. We are here today to celebrate an investment. We are here to celebrate the time, the money, and the effort it took to get us to this stage." I paused, letting my eyes drift over the crowd before landing back on the front row. But in the world of finance, and in the world of families, not all investments are created equal. Some people invest with love, others invest with a calculator. I saw Richard flinch. He knew. He looked at me, and for the first time, he really saw me. He didn't see the 13-year-old girl he left in a clinic. He saw the prosecutor I had become. 15 years ago, I continued, I was lying in a room at Rockbridge Regional Medical Center. I was 13. I had just been diagnosed with a condition that was going to cost a lot of money to fix, and in that room, I learned a very hard lesson about value. The audience was dead silent. This was not the standard follow your dreams speech. "I watched my parents sign a piece of paper," I said, keeping my tone conversational, almost gentle. "It was not a permission slip. It was a surrender of custody. They calculated the cost of my dialysis against the cost of their lifestyle, and they decided I was a liability they needed to liquidate. They walked out of that room to protect their bank account, and they left me to be a ward of the state." A gasp rippled through the auditorium. I saw people in the rows behind the VIP section leaning forward. I saw the dean look up, surprised, but he didn't stop me. Helen was pale. She was gripping her purse so hard her knuckles were white. She looked around, terrified, realizing that the people sitting near her were starting to stare. "For a long time," I said, "I thought my worth was zero. I thought I was a broken item that had been discarded, but then I met someone who did not know how to use a calculator. I turned my head. I looked directly at the woman in the royal blue dress, sitting 2 seats away from the people who birthed me. She was a nurse working the night shift, I said, my voice softening just enough to let the love show through the armor. She didn't have a portfolio. She didn't have a trust fund. She had a 2-bedroom apartment and a heart the size of Colorado. Gabby was crying. She wasn't hiding it. She had her hand over her mouth, looking up at me with a pride that outshone every spotlight in the room. She took me home when the state had nowhere else to put me, I told the crowd. She worked double shifts for years, missing holidays, missing sleep, ruining her own health just to make sure I had the medicine I needed. She didn't do it because she had to. She didn't do it for a tax write-off. She did it because she saw a human being in pain, and she refused to look away. I pointed at the dry erase board in my mind, the one that had saved me. She taught me that family is not a noun. It is a verb. It is the act of showing up. It is the act of staying when things get hard. She taught me that you are allowed to dream big, even when the world tells you you are small. I took a deep breath. This was the moment. So today, I said, my voice ringing out with absolute clarity, my name is on this diploma, but this degree belongs to the woman who bought it with her life. It belongs to my mother, Gabriela Santos. The room exploded. It wasn't just polite applause, it was a roar. Students stood up, parents stood up. The Evans family, sitting right there in the front row, stood up and cheered, hugging Gabby. But Richard and Helen remained seated. They were statues in a sea of motion. They couldn't stand up. If they stood up, they would be applauding the woman who did the job they were too selfish to do. They sat there, small and pathetic in their expensive clothes, trapped in the crosshairs of their own choices. I waited for the noise to die down. I wasn't done. However, I said, cutting through the lingering applause, there is a second lesson I learned on my way here, a lesson about accountability. The room went quiet again. The shift in my tone signaled that the tribute was over. The trial was resuming. There are 2 people sitting in the front row today who traveled a long way to be here, I said. I looked directly at Richard and Helen. The camera followed my gaze. Their faces filled the giant screens. They looked like deer in headlights. Richard made a move as if to stand up and leave, but he realized instantly that walking out now, with a camera on his face, would be an admission of guilt. He was pinned. They are my biological parents, I said. And for a long time, I wondered why they came back today. Did they come to apologize? Did they come to see the daughter they left behind? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate register. But then I remembered something my law professors taught me. Follow the paper trail. Helen let out a small sob. I saw her hand go to her throat. You see, I said to the audience, abandoning a child is one thing, but using that child's identity after you leave, that is something else. Richard's face turned a violent shade of red. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He knew about the credit cards. He knew about the home theater system. He knew about the debt they had racked up in my name while I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. I didn't list the crimes. I didn't give the case numbers. I didn't have to. The implication was enough. I learned that some people view children not as people to be loved, but as assets to be leveraged, I said. They thought that because I was a child, because I was sick, and because I was alone, I would never notice. They thought I would never have the voice or the power to audit the ledger. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. They were wrong. I saw the realization hit the audience. The whispers started. Did she just say they stole from her? Is she talking about fraud? The looks directed at the Whitfields shifted from curiosity to disgust. People in the rows behind them were actually leaning away, creating a physical gap of judgment. I looked at Richard. He was staring at the floor. He couldn't look at me. He couldn't look at the dean. He was a man who had spent his life building a reputation, and I had just dismantled it in 3 minutes. To the people who gave me their DNA, I said, addressing them directly now. I want to say thank you. They looked up, confused by the sudden gratitude. Thank you for leaving me, I said. Because if you hadn't left, I never would have found the family sitting next to you. I gestured to Gabby and the Evans family. And thank you for teaching me that a title does not make a family. You can call yourself a father, you can call yourself a mother, but in the end, you are just the people who signed the receipt. I stepped back from the podium. My name is Nora Chavez, and I am done being your victim. I am your consequence. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The silence held for 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, and then it broke. The applause was deafening. It was different this time. It wasn't just celebratory. It was fierce. It was the sound of thousands of people rallying behind the truth. I walked over to the dean. He shook my hand, and I saw a look of absolute respect in his eyes. He handed me my diploma. I walked across the stage, holding the leather-bound folder high, on the big screen. The camera lingered on the front row one last time. Gabby was weeping, holding on to Mrs. Evans, but Richard and Helen were scrambling. They were gathering their things, their heads ducked low, desperate to escape the glare of the lights. Richard was pushing past people, ignoring the angry glares from the other parents. Helen was using her purse to shield her face. They were running. I stood at the edge of the stage, watching them flee. I felt a profound sense of lightness. They thought this was the end. They thought the humiliation of this speech was the punishment. They didn't know about the file on the state auditor's desk. They didn't know about the investigation into the reimbursement fraud. They didn't know that the state of Colorado was currently printing out subpoenas with their names on them. I watched the exit door swing shut behind them. Run, I thought, run as fast as you can. But you can't outrun the paper trail. The speech was just the opening statement. The real trial was just beginning. The ceremony ended not with a bang, but with a frantic, desperate scramble. As the recessional music played, a triumphant orchestral swell that felt like the soundtrack to my liberation. I walked down the center aisle. I was flanked by Gabby on my left and the Evans family on my right. We moved as a unit, a solid wall of shared history and genuine love that no amount of money could breach. We exited the cool, air-conditioned auditorium and stepped out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the university quad. The air smelled of cut grass and expensive perfume. Graduates were throwing their caps in the air. Mothers were crying, and fathers were lighting cigars. It was a scene of pure joy, but not for everyone. I saw them coming before they saw me. Richard and Helen were pushing through the crowd, ignoring the dirty looks from the families they were shoving aside. They looked frantic. Their polished country club veneers had cracked. Richard's tie was crooked. Helen's mascara was smudged. They looked like people who were watching a lifeboat sail away while they stood on a sinking ship. Nora. Nora. Wait, it was Richard. He tried to lunge toward me, his hand reaching out to grab my arm, to establish physical dominance, to force a conversation. He never made it. A large man in a black security blazer stepped in front of him. I had hired private security for the day, paid for with the stipend money I had saved. The guard did not say a word. He simply acted as a human wall. Richard bounced off him, stumbling back in indignity. "We need to speak to our daughter," Richard snapped, trying to regain his composure. "This is a private family matter." "Step aside." The guard did not move. He crossed his arms. "She does not want to speak to you," the guard said. His voice was flat and bored. "Nora, please," Helen cried out from behind Richard. She sounded hysterical. "We just want to explain. You misunderstood everything. That speech, it was cruel. We did everything for you." I stopped. I turned slowly to face them. I stood 10 feet away, safe behind my wall of security and my wall of chosen family. "You did nothing for me," I said calmly. "You did everything for yourselves." Before they could respond, a young woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a designer handbag stepped out from behind them. It was Kendall, my sister. I had not seen her since she was 14. She looked exactly like her Instagram photos, beautiful, polished, and completely empty. She looked at me, looking me up and down, assessing my gown, my shoes, and the expensive paper I was holding. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed. Jesus. Nora. Kendall sighed, rolling her eyes. You really had to make a scene. My phone is blowing up. People are asking if we are criminals. Hello? Kendall. I said. She crossed her arms. Look, Mom and Dad are freaking out. She said, just tell them you were being dramatic. Fix it. I mean, you are obviously doing fine. You are the valedictorian. You are going to be a big-shot lawyer. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. So, are you rich now? Like, did you sign with a big firm? Because seriously, this family needs a win right now. I stared at her. There was no, I missed you. There was no, I am sorry you almost died. There was just a calculation. She was her parents' daughter. Through and through. I am not rich. Kendall. I said, but I am solvent, which is more than I can say for you. Richard stepped forward again, his face red. Enough of this, he barked. Nora, we are going to go to lunch. We are going to sit down, and we are going to discuss how to repair this damage. You have humiliated us. You owe us a retraction. I owe you, I asked. I let out a short, dry laugh. That is funny, because according to the state of Colorado, the debt flows the other direction. I nodded to a man standing quietly to the side of the security guard. He was wearing a cheap suit and holding a thick manila envelope. He was a process server. I had arranged for him to be here. Mr. Richard Whitfield, Mrs. Helen Whitfield, the man asked. Richard looked at him, confused. Yes, you are served, the man said. He thrust the heavy envelope into Richard's chest. Richard instinctively grabbed it. What is this? Helen asked, her voice trembling. Open it, I said. Richard tore open the envelope. He pulled out the stack of documents. The top page was stamped with the seal of the Colorado Department of Human Services, Recovery Division. I watched his eyes scan the page. I watched the moment the numbers hit him. It is a demand for reimbursement, I explained, my voice carrying over the chatter of the crowd. For 3 years of dialysis, for a kidney transplant, for immunosuppressant drugs, for hospital stays. Richard's hands started to shake. The paper rattled. This is over $500,000, he whispered, plus interest. I added, and penalties, and legal fees. The state does not like it when people with offshore accounts pretend to be indigent to offload their medical bills onto the taxpayers. Helen grabbed the papers from him. She stared at them, her eyes bulging. And behind that, I continued, you will find the notification from the district attorney's office regarding the identity theft investigation, the credit cards, the personal loans, the utility bills. I stepped closer. Just an inch. You stole my name when I was 13. I said, I took it back. And now, I am giving you the bill. Helen looked up at me. She looked terrified. You can't do this, she shrieked. It will ruin us. Richard's reputation. The firm. We will lose the house. You should have thought of that before you bought a home theater system with your daughter's credit rating, Gabby said. Her voice was sharp as a knife. Richard looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at me with pure hatred. If you had just kept your mouth shut, we would have been fine. He hissed. If you had just stayed away, we could have handled this. You ungrateful little brat. We gave you life. He took a step forward, his hand raised as if to point a finger in my face, or maybe strike me, but before he could move, Mr. Evans stepped in. Mr. Evans was a quiet man. He was a carpenter. He had hands like catcher's mitts. He stepped between Richard and me, not aggressively, but with the immovable weight of a father protecting his child. Don't you dare come near her, Mr. Evans said. His voice was low and rumbling. You gave her DNA. That is biology. You didn't give her a life. My son did. Mrs. Evans stepped up beside me. She didn't look at Helen. She looked at me. She wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and safety. We are so proud of you. Nora, Mrs. Evans whispered. Michael would be so proud of you. I hugged her back, burying my face in her shoulder. Helen watched this. She stood there, clutching the lawsuit that was about to destroy her financial life, and watched a stranger hug the daughter she had thrown away. She watched Mrs. Evans do the job she had resigned from, and in that moment, Helen broke. She didn't cry for the money. She didn't cry for the reputation. For the first time in 15 years, she looked at me and saw the hole in her own life. She saw that she had been replaced. She saw that she was irrelevant. She started to sob. It was a jagged, ugly sound. Why Helen wailed. "Why are you doing this to us, Kendall?" Who had been reading the lawsuit over her father's shoulder, finally spoke up. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its bratty veneer. "Because we are broke, Mom," Kendall said. Richard spun around. "Shut up. Kendall." "No," Kendall said, looking at me. "That is why we came. Nora, the trust fund, the one they said was for me. It is gone. Dad leveraged it 3 years ago to cover bad trades. The house is mortgaged to the hilt." She looked at her parents with disgust. "They didn't come here to reconcile." "Nora," Kendall said, "they came because they read about the signing bonuses for top law graduates. They came because they thought you were their bailout. They needed your money to pay off the debts they hid from the club." The final puzzle piece clicked into place. They hadn't come for redemption. They hadn't even come for vanity. They had come to harvest me one last time. I looked at Richard. He looked small. He looked like a gambler who had bet everything on the wrong horse and lost. I stepped out of Mrs. Evans' embrace. I smoothed my gown. I looked at the 3 people who shared my genetics. "I am not taking revenge," I said. My voice was calm. It was the calmest I had ever felt. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This is just accounting. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. I handed it to the process server, who handed it to Richard. "What is this?" Richard asked, his voice defeated. "A permanent no-contact order." I said, "If you contact me, if you come near my home, if you try to email me, you will be arrested. If you try to speak to Gabby, you will be arrested." I looked at Kendall. "That includes you." I said. Kendall looked down at her shoes. She didn't argue. "You wanted to rewrite the past." I told them. "You wanted to pretend you were good parents who made a hard choice. But you can't rewrite the past when the receipts still exist. You don't get to collect a reward for a job you quit." I turned to Gabby. I held out my hand. "Let's go home." "Mom," I said. Gabby took my hand. She squeezed it tight. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." We turned our backs on the Whitfields. We didn't look back to see them standing in the quad, clutching their lawsuits, surrounded by the wreckage of their own greed. We didn't look back to see the security guards escorting them off the property. We walked away. 3 months later, the sign went up on the brick building in downtown Denver. It wasn't a large building, but it had big windows that let in the light. I stood on the sidewalk, holding a pair of ceremonial scissors. Gabby stood next to me. She was wearing a blazer. She looked like the director of operations she was about to become. The sign read, "The Gabriela Santos Center for Patient Rights." It wasn't a law firm that chased ambulances. It was a clinic. We had a team of 3 lawyers and 2 social workers. Our mission was simple. We fought for the people the system wanted to discard. We fought for the sick kids whose parents were looking at calculators instead of hearts. We fought for the patients who were being crushed by billing fraud. I looked at the sign. Then I looked at Gabby. "It is perfect," she said. "It is just the beginning." I replied. The wind blew, crisp and cool, reminding me of the day I left the hospital with a plastic bag and a stranger. I had lost a family that day, but I had found a life. I had turned the scar tissue of my abandonment into armor, and now I was going to use that armor to shield others. Justice doesn't always look like a gavel banging. Sometimes it looks like a daughter honoring the woman who stayed, while the people who left fade into the silence they deserve. I cut the ribbon, the doors opened, and we went to work. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Nora's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Helena Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.